You guys keep supporting this series, so it looks like it's here to stay. So I present to you Volume 3 of Scary Stories to Relax To. Tonight we have 8 stories. We are joined by Bad Vibe Storytelling. He will be reading Story 4, a short story involving a Ouija board. He is just shy of 20,000 subscribers, so if you enjoy his narration, be sure to follow his link in the description. A huge thank you to all of the very talented writers who have allowed this video to be possible. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. I would love to share it with everyone here. Be sure to like the video if you want Volume 4 in the near future. I'll try and make that happen for you guys. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. I'm curious to see if we can reach 100k before the end of the year. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I suppose that's a good way to start this. My thoughts are a bit jumbled, so you'll have to bear with me. Chasing the high is how I spent all of my time. I'd skip out on bills if it meant I could afford going to one of the few escape rooms in the country I hadn't been to yet. That was my biggest hobby for a time. Skydiving and other daredevil-esque activities had stopped working a long time ago. They're always the same thing. If you've done it once, you've done it a million times. Escape rooms, though, they had new puzzles to figure out each time. I guess it was only a matter of time before I'd grow out of that as well. At the age of 23, I discovered urban exploration. In my mind, this was basically the same thing as the escape rooms, except there aren't any actors. The dangers of being caught and fined only fueled the fire in me more. I made it my mission to find and document spirits. Of course, this sounded better in my head than it did in execution. Try I might, but I couldn't find anything worth sharing with the world. Name almost any haunted place in the USA. I've been there, found nothing, and went home with doubts. Sure, I have some stories. One time I fell into an open elevator shaft and caught a rusted wire to save myself. It sounds cooler on paper, I promise. Another time, I heard footsteps and voices on the floor above me in an abandoned asylum. Ran up, and was met with another group. Disappointment isn't a strong enough word. Up until recently, the scariest encounter I ever had was stumbling upon a deranged homeless man who chased me out of an old farmhouse with a knife. That one revived my interest for a time. At least until I realized the odds of something like that happening again was slim to none. If you couldn't tell already, I had a bit of a problem. Some would call me insane. For this reason, I had no friends and my family avoided me like the plague. That was okay. I understood. My lifestyle is a lot to keep up with, so I stayed busy either way. Well, I guess I did have one friend, even though I had never met him in person. We got to know each other through an urban exploration forum. If you thought I was obsessed, this guy brought it to a whole other level. His name was Derek. After a few interactions, we gave each other our real-life phone numbers and kept each other updated on our findings. This guy had the lowdown on everything. He knew of places Google didn't even know about. I lost countless jobs due to this lifestyle. It's tough finding an employer who won't get mad at me for leaving days at a time with no warning. How I made it work for as long as I did is just as much a mystery to me as it probably is to you. Call it good luck in the getting hired department, or something. If I lost a job, I could find another one pretty quick. Of course, this meant I never worked anywhere prestigious. But hey, if I ever caught something worthwhile on camera, maybe I could set myself up for a while. As you can assume, this started seeming more and more like a fairy tale day by day. My belief in the paranormal had dwindled to near absolute zero. I went a while wondering what was next for me. Doubt I'd find the next high creeping more and more into my subconscious every day. I was 25 now. I had spent 2 years wasting my life and had nothing to show for it. Just a sketchy job history and an empty bank account. It's not like I could do much with all of my footage either. What was I going to do? Incriminate myself by publishing video of me breaking into almost every place of interest in the US? Surprisingly, I began to accept my fate. It was finally time to nut up and fix my life. For a few weeks I tried reconnecting with my family, and got back on speaking terms with most of them. My old friends gave me the silent treatment, but honestly, I didn't blame them. Life was going okay for a time. That is until I got a text from Derek. It read, "Hey Tom, I got intel on an abandoned asylum in Montana. I know those are your favorite. Going to check it out in a week. Supposed to be the real deal. Many missing person cases in the area as well. I'll send you the coordinates so if you don't hear from me, you know where to look. You know me though. I always carry. Attached was an image with the coordinates. I'd be lying if I said his text didn't pique my interest, especially considering I live in northern Idaho, and this place wasn't all that far away. I've traveled all the way across the country before. This would be nothing, but my life was finally starting to move forward. I couldn't let this stop that. Plus I knew Derek would update me if he found anything. Even if there wasn't, he'd text something like, it was a bust, or something along those lines. Fast forward 2 weeks. I'm ashamed to say I had spent every day that last week waiting for an update. It was getting to me, so I texted Derek. Hey Derek, find anything in Montana? It wasn't like him to not update right away. As I said, he was really into this stuff, and it was like he couldn't wait to tell me everything once he returned home. I wouldn't have been surprised if I got a response within a few minutes. Fast forward another 2 weeks, and no response ever came. This left me with a moral dilemma. What if something did happen to Derek? What if he needed my help? The adrenaline-fueled habits returned to my mind, and I'm sure you can guess what happens next. This story wouldn't exist if I didn't do exactly what you expect. I had no info on the asylum other than its location. It would have to do. I began the drive around noon. I'll spare you the nonsense of my driving excursion, considering I was held up a number of times by different annoyances. I arrived at 10 p.m. It was completely dark, just the way I like it. Arriving, it was a one-way in, one-way out road that was roughly 5 miles if I had to guess. The place was eerie to say the least. This place was decrepit. The windows were still intact, surprisingly. It was 6 stories tall. The asylum was massive. Pulling into the giant gravel parking lot, there were no other cars in sight. Okay, so maybe nothing happened to Derek. His car would still be here if he was, right? There's always the off chance he could have hit his car, but considering the desolation of the surroundings, there'd be no point. I grabbed my camera and began my walk. Reaching the steps, I felt a chill. How I missed that feeling. Always worth checking if the front door is accessible. A lot can be told by whether or not front doors are unlocked. If they were unlocked, it could be a hot spot for locals. If not, it could be moderately patrolled. The giant double doors swung wide open without a budge. I was instantly hit with the smell of rot. This wasn't just normal rot. Trust me, over the past couple years, I had smelled it all. This was putrid, like iron mixed with literal shit. Naturally it was dark, but my military-grade flashlight lit up the place like it was daylight. My handheld Canon also had night vision, so seeing wasn't an issue. In the main room there was a front desk and 3 hallways, one leading straight and one to either side of me. Odd. Usually there would be stairs here, but judging by the outside, this building could be older than any other I'd explored yet. I couldn't wait to see what I could find. Figuring the front doors were placed dead center, I decided to flip a coin. Heads, I'd go right. Tails, I'd go left. Either one would be much longer than the other. I fished out a quarter and flipped it. Missing the catch, the quarter bounced off the ground. The sound echoed down all 3 hallways. It seemed to never end. Once the sound reached what seemed to be forever away, the sound started echoing back towards me. I'm no expert, but this didn't seem right. I was then smacked square in the forehead by something. It stung like hell. I heard the quarter again hit the ground. What the hell? Did the quarter just come flying down the hallway and hit me? No way it could bounce at the velocity I was hit with. Not that the former made much sense either. Anybody with a logical brain would have left right then and there. But I was intrigued, not scared. Dreams of catching something and becoming famous began flooding my mind in the same way it used to. I shined the flashlight down to my feet to find the quarter. Yeah, this place must be the real deal. The quarter was sitting on its side. I don't know the odds of that happening. I've never seen that before. I thought for a second. If I was hit in the forehead while facing forward, and going forward was never an option, something really wanted me to go that way. If I was going to catch something on film, that would be the way to go. Forward I went. I walked about 100 yards when I came across stairs leading up. The building really was bigger on the inside, maybe literally because there was still a lot of hallway to go. I ascended the stairs and reached the 2nd floor. Looking back, I don't know how I didn't find it odd that the building was 6 stories, but these stairs only went up 1 floor. I was met with another hallway. Doors to individual rooms were littered both ways. Wheelchairs and other expected debris were littered everywhere. I decided to head right. the same direction I was heading on the first floor. I was curious how long this hallway really went. I pivoted to the right, and this is where things got real. 10 feet in front of me was a girl in a nightgown, long black hair covering her face. Holy shit, I caught something. I checked the camera, and she showed up clear as day. "Ma'am, do you need my help?" I asked, and I was ecstatic. This is something no one has ever captured before. The clearest footage possible. This was bound to go viral. I took a couple steps towards her. "Leave," she whispered. I couldn't think of much to say, but I managed a quick, "Why?" "Leave. Leave while you have the chance. You don't have much time," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. This was unreal. Not only did I capture a spirit on film, but I was having a conversation with it. Derek wasn't kidding. I mumbled under my breath. Derek didn't listen either. She instantly whispered. Wait, what does she mean? Derek didn't listen. This was everything I ever hoped for. But if the spirits here are this bold, why did Derek never say anything? I bet he was at home thinking about how to publish his own footage right now. That asshole. He was going to become famous first. I can't believe he didn't tell me about this. Money does strange things to people. In retrospect, I realize now this ideology applied to no one more than it did me. The magnitude of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I am speaking to a spirit, face to face. She has told me to leave. Here I am just filming it like an idiot. Maybe I should go. I checked the camera again to make sure I was still capturing this. I was. I have what I need. Maybe I should just go. I took a step back, and the woman let out a scream and ran into the room closest to her. Okay, yeah, I'm leaving. This is too much for even me. I turned around, and before I could even react, I was cold-clocked across the head. I hit the ground. The camera and flashlight flew out of my hand. I didn't try to retrieve them. I got back on my feet and took a few steps back. Standing in front of me was a man dressed as a surgeon. He was muscular. Too muscular. This guy made Arnold look small. The look in his eyes was crazed to say the least. In his hand was a giant knife. I turned around and continued down the hallway as fast as I could. I could hear him running, trailing behind, but he seemed to be slower than me. I ran for what seemed to be ages until I came to a cafeteria. It was what you'd imagine it to be, large and open. I'd be trapped if I stayed, but I couldn't turn around now. The surgeon was still stomping his way down the hallway. The kitchen was my only option. I hopped through the serving window and was impressed by the size of this kitchen. I chose to hide inside one of the ovens. There were 5 ovens in total, and everything else was too wide open to risk. I climbed in the last one and held my breath the best I could. The surgeon entered maybe 30 seconds later. He was searching everything, pulling counters off the walls with brute strength and flipping them over. He got to the ovens and searched the first, then the second, third, fourth. He placed his hands on the door from mine, and that's when I heard something clatter in the cafeteria. He must have heard it too because he let out a guttural scream and released the oven to find the source. I might be saved. I waited about 5 minutes before I finally climbed out. I don't know what the sound that spared my life in that moment was, but I wasn't going to stand around to question it. I creeped back to the haunting hallway and walked as lightly as I could to find the stairs. I was going to get out of here. Now. A long while in, I was met once again with the woman. "You need to hurry," she told me. "How much further do I have?" I questioned. "You're getting close to the stairs. Stay quiet, and once you reach the first floor, run. Each floor has an evil entity haunting it. This floor is the safest, believe it or not. The entity on the first floor is not as dumb as this one. Stay safe. There are hundreds of us trapped here. Now go." I wanted to ask her why she was helping me, but she was gone once again. I eventually saw something shining in the distance. It was my flashlight. I could start running, grab my camera that had to be near, and get out of here. I began my jog, but just as I did, I heard that scream again. The silhouette of the surgeon was on the other side of the flashlight. He was closer to it than I, but remembering how slow he was, I might be able to outrun him. I knew what was behind me, and I couldn't risk getting caught again with nowhere to hide. I sprinted faster than I ever have in my life. His pace quickened as well. For a time, it looked like I might beat him, but once I got closer, I realized the flashlight had been knocked pretty far. He was closer than me. I'm screwed. I'd have to risk juking him. There was no other option. I had never felt this kind of adrenaline before. We met at the stairs at the same time, and I went to dive down the steps, but it was useless. He caught me and slammed me to the ground. He was too powerful. He slammed the knife into my chest, and I felt cold liquid cover my torso. "Tom!" Someone yelled. Next thing I knew, someone tackled the surgeon off of me. I scrambled to my feet and flew down the steps, not questioning why they knew my name. I reached the first floor and began another mad dash to escape this hell. The floor was littered with blood. It was everywhere. I could hear hundreds of voices telling me to run. It was overbearing, but I did just that. I reached the doors, went through them like they weren't even there, and flew down the steps. Then, I hit an invisible wall. Looking out into the parking lot, there were cars everywhere, mine included. I suppose I got everything I ever hoped for. It wasn't worth it though, because in the end, it cost me my life. As strange as it sounds, I hadn't really wanted the doll at first. I mean, I was 7. According to my dad, I was too old for dolls. But, as my aunt put it, Dad wasn't worth listening to on his best day, so I kept the doll, and named her Connie. Connie was a pretty typical doll. Her arms, legs, and head were made of plastic. Her body was stuffed with cotton. She had long, loose dark hair, and she wore an ankle-length red dress and black Mary Jane style shoes. Not a Barbie or American Girl, but still well-made and fairly adorable. She even spoke when you squeezed her stomach. She had 3 different sayings. "I love you," "What do you want to do?" and a light-hearted giggle. Despite my initial dislike, she won me over fairly quickly. I mean, I didn't have anyone else to play with. Mom, Dad, and I lived in a trailer park for most of my early childhood. Mom worked as a bartender at a club, and Dad worked as a mall cop. Though I didn't know this at the time, Mom was an alcoholic, and spent most evenings passed out on the couch. Dad wasn't an alcoholic, but he wasn't perfect. He was opinionated, to put it gently. If anyone had an opinion that he didn't agree with, he would shout or fight that person until they agreed with him. It was this little habit of his that had gotten him fired from the CPD and landed us in the trailer park. A little fact that my grandma shared with me later. I wouldn't call my parents abusive. At least, they didn't hit me or starve me or anything, but they weren't very attentive. I can remember times when they wouldn't be home until past my bedtime, or times when they didn't get groceries until the fridge was literally empty, or once when I was stuck at school until 4 hours after it ended because neither of them picked me up. And yes, Dad yelled at me for little things like spilling drinks or slamming doors, but I still loved them. Does that sound crazy? Anyway, my 7th birthday came and went. I expected my parents to take me to dinner and they didn't. I expected cake and presents. None appeared. I expected them to acknowledge the day. Never happened. After school ended the Friday after my birthday, my aunt picked me up and took me to a little pizza place in the city for a late birthday celebration. Just the 2 of us. That's where she gave me Connie. And, if I'm being honest, that's when things started getting weird. Before I continue the story, let me explain something. My aunt, although I wasn't told this until later, had been trying to get custody of me for years. The fact that I was already living with my biological parents, and that there was no evidence of them abusing/neglecting me, kept her from succeeding. Practically every member of my family knew that I didn't have a great home life, and they had been trying to get me out of my parents' custody for years. Tells you a lot about the justice system, doesn't it? Anyway, on to the story. After my initial hesitance, I fell in love with Connie. I carried her everywhere except school, and played with her every second I could. She became something to comfort me when Dad was yelling or Mom was drinking. A reminder that I wasn't alone. It must have been a week after my pizza party with my aunt that Dad had lost his job. He came home, chugged a bottle of Mom's whiskey, and slammed the bottle into the garbage. I'd been watching after-school TV with Connie, and the sound of shattering glass made me jump. He rolled around and saw me. Or rather, he saw me holding Connie. "What the hell is this?" He picked Connie up by the leg, dangling her out of my reach. Her dress and hair dangled down towards the floor, but she was still smiling. I stood up, trying not to cry, and explained that Aunt Judy had given it to me as a birthday present. He stared at me, as if trying to remember when my birthday was. Then, as if remembering that, yes, it had been my birthday over a week ago, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter. He handed me the coin and Connie, and wished me a half-hearted happy birthday. Tears staining my face, I ran from my room. I laid on my bed, crying silently into my pillow. He'd scared me. He'd scared me so bad. I looked up when I finished to see Connie sitting at the foot of my bed. I picked her up and squeezed her stomach. "Your daddy is mean. What do you want to do?" I paused. I hadn't heard her say that before. Still, I always felt better after talking to her. "Daddy always yells. I wish he'd stop." I pushed her middle again. "I love you. I want what's best for you." Another new phrase, I thought. Wish I could live with Aunt Judy. She never yells for no reason, and she's nice. I squeezed Connie again. "I love Judy, and I love you. I hate Mommy, and I hate Daddy. What do you want to do?" Had she always been able to say these things? I'd never seen her box. Maybe she could. I answered her question. I wished they would go away. I squeezed her again. She giggled. As weird as it sounds, I felt much better after I talked to Connie. Holding her tight, I went to see if Dad was still mad. He wasn't. He had a half-empty bottle in his hand and was laying on the couch, asleep. I crept out of my room, grabbed a bottled water and a sleeve of saltines from the kitchen, and went back into my room. Connie and I had a picnic on my bedroom floor, and then went to bed. I could hear Mom and Dad yelling at each other as I tried to sleep. Eventually I did. I woke up at about 3 in the morning. Instead of their yelling dying out and ending, as they went to bed like it usually did, this time it had intensified. They were screaming obscenities at each other, him yelling about her drinking, and her screaming about his losing jobs seeing other women. Then, something weird happened. Dad said something along the lines of, "The fuck?" That's when the screaming resumed, but it was so much louder this time, almost as if they were in intense pain. For 30 minutes they screamed. It scared me so much worse than their normal fighting, and I hid under the covers until it stopped. It was around that time that I noticed that Connie had fallen on the floor. I picked her up. She was still comforting. I darted under the covers again when I heard the police sirens. I heard the sound of someone breaking down the door. There were muffled voices that I didn't recognize, and the sound of heavy boots marching through the trailer. I started weeping silent tears as the door to my room opened. The blanket was ripped off my bed. I looked with terror into the eyes of a policewoman. "Miss, what's your name?" "Lori." I hugged Connie closer to me. "And this is Connie." "Okay, we need to get you out of here. Listen carefully. I need you to cover your eyes and not look until I say so, okay?" "Okay." I squeezed my eyes shut and put my right hand over my eyes. I hugged Connie close with my left. The policewoman held my shoulder, guiding me through the trailer and out the front door. Though I couldn't see anything, everything felt very off. The other police officers stopped talking as I entered the room, but I smelled something weird, like metal. And why was the floor wet and sticky? I wasn't allowed to open my eyes until we were outside. They had surrounded the trailer with yellow police tape. I was led into the back of the police cruiser, after the officer promised that I wasn't under arrest, and we sped away. I never saw the trailer park again. We went straight to the police station. I told them everything. They told us at school to always tell the truth to a police officer. They seemed interested in Mom's drinking and Dad's yelling. They were really interested in Connie saying things she wasn't supposed to. They asked if they could see Connie. I knew I could trust the police. That's what they said at school. So I let them see her. They took her into another room. After a long time, they brought her back. She felt a lot lighter, but she could still talk. They started asking me a lot of questions about Aunt Judy. After that night at the police station, I went to live with my grandma. She lived in an actual house, never drank or yelled, and loved to cook. She told me that my parents were dead, and tried her best to shield me from the truth of what happened that night. Over the years, however, through the news and kids at school, I eventually learned the full story. Aunt Judy had hidden a microphone in Connie, trying to get as much evidence as she could on my parents. Those weird new phrases Connie had said were actually my aunt talking to me. Apparently she'd been out of her medication for a while, and our conversation had given her an idea. That night, she climbed into the trailer through my parents' bedroom window. Their yelling had drowned out the noise. She then proceeded to torture them to death with various tools from the kitchen. The neighbors had heard the screaming and called the cops. As disturbing as the story was, the murder wasn't the scariest part. My aunt, now convinced that she could be my legal guardian, had been ready to kidnap me and run away when the police pulled up. They found her fingerprints all over the crime scene and the microphone in Connie. She had retreated the way she came, and had cleared her belongings and fled her apartment by the time the police got there. They still haven't found her. I first noticed this a few days ago when I was planting some daffodils, and noticed the statue was slightly shifted from its usual place. I finished planting the last bulb and went to investigate. I walked up to the statue, while wiping my hands off the gardening apron I wear, and inspected the dirt around it. I noticed straight away the imprint of where the statue was, and wondered why it was moved. I live alone since the divorce, and use gardening to escape from stress of everyday life. I struggled to move the statue back into its original position, and stood back to study its great craftsmanship. It was of a gray wolf in a stalking position. It was carved out of gray stone, which gave it an amazing look, and its eyes were blood-red rubies set into the stone and shaped into eyes. I don't know how the sculptor did it, but it made the statue beautiful. I didn't know at the time that the rubies were real, until a jeweler friend of mine told me they were. All I'm going to say is that I nearly collapsed from shock. Anyway, I stood there and wondered how someone could have moved it. The statue was heavy. It was close to 250 pounds of solid rock. I scanned the dirt to see if someone had brought a dolly or something to move it. I also began to wonder why someone would make such an effort for a joke. After I couldn't think of anything, I went to the back gate of my house to see if someone had broken the lock or found another way into my garden. I saw that the lock wasn't touched since the last time I used it. I racked my head, trying to find some sort of explanation for the statue being moved. That night, I was lying in bed, struggling to sleep because of the thoughts going through my head, when I heard the sound of movement outside. So I leapt out of bed and ran to the window to try and catch the person in my garden. I opened the curtains, and I saw a shadowy figure disappearing over the garden wall. My heart was pounding in my chest when I saw that, but I nearly collapsed when I looked over and saw the statue was gone. I picked up my phone and rang the police. They arrived in the early hours of the morning, and dawn had just begun to creep its way over the horizon. I met them at the front door and I explained the situation. They asked me if they could look at the area in which the statue was. I had no problem and escorted them to my back door. When I opened the door, we saw the statue in the same position that it was in the last time I saw it. And this confused me. The police gave me a warning for wasting their time, and if it happened again, they'd arrest me. I started to try and explain that it was impossible for it to be back in place within the 2-minute gap between the last time I checked, but I stopped and kept quiet. They left and I went back out to have a look around the garden, to see if I could find how the person had been coming and going into my garden. When I found nothing, I went to the statue to try and find any clues to how it's being moved. I searched the statue from top to bottom but found nothing, but some scratches on the claws. But, just as I began to stand up, I noticed a speck of something red on the jaw of the wolf. This was strange. Maybe the person cut themselves and got a bit of blood on the statue. I got some hot water and a sponge and wiped it clean. I didn't want to get into more trouble with the police. This brings me on to last night. At 1 a.m., I was awoken by the sound of footsteps on my roof. I inched my way off the bed and quietly moved towards the baseball bat that I kept in my room in case of a burglary or home invasion, and held it at the ready as I reached towards the curtain. Just as the footsteps reached my window, I braced myself before opening the curtain. The last thing I remember was something crashing into me, and me hitting the floor, but seeing something red before blacking out. I woke up this morning with a pain in my head. I got up and searched my room to see if anything was missing, with the pain beginning to subside, and found that nothing had been taken. I walked to the bathroom and examined myself for any injuries. Other than the cut above my left eyebrow, I couldn't see any other injuries. I cleaned the cut with the emergency first aid kit. enclosed it with some medical glue, and I put a small bandage over it. I got dressed and went outside to see if there was anything outside from last night that might give me a clue as to what happened after I blacked out. I searched the area, but I couldn't find anything, other than some scraps in the mud by the statue. I gave up and walked back inside, and carried on with my morning. I was sitting at my computer when I read that a security guard at the local storage facility was found dead last night, and a farmer, along with all of his chickens, were found the day before that. I noticed that this all happened in the 10-mile radius from my home. I didn't know this because I've become a bit of a hermit after the divorce, and only go outside to garden, collect my payments from the post office, and get food for the week. I noticed that both men had puncture marks in their neck and arms. The authorities classed this as an animal attack, and left the investigation at that. I clocked the times that the men were presumed dead as between 12 a.m. and 6 a.m., and I noticed that it was between those times the person was doing something to my home. I said to myself that the blood on the wolf's jaw must have been from either the farmer or his chickens. I shuddered at the thought, and cursed myself for not leaving it alone. I realized that if this person was the killer, that I might be next. I began to panic and think over my options. If I went to the authorities, they'd laugh me out of the station, since they already believe that I'm making stuff up, or arrest me, thinking I did it for some stupid reason. So I decided to take it into my own hands, and set up defenses around the entrances of the house. After setting up all the defenses, I sat at the kitchen table and went onto my computer. I found this sub and decided to write this, and as it unfolds for the meanwhile, give updates on what's happening as it transpires. At the time of writing this, it is now 5 a.m. and nothing has happened. Wait, I hear something in my room. The window was just broken and I hear something moving around upstairs. I hear it moving towards the stairs. Shit. I left the kitchen door open. I'm going to close it before they notice, just to be safe. I'm going to bring my bat with me. Oh dear God. I just got to the door and I heard it come downstairs. I saw it at the end of the staircase. It was the wolf. I don't know how this is possible, but it's the damn wolf statue. I spent so much time thinking it was a person, but it wasn't. When it saw me, it growled and ran to the door. I slammed it with a yell and barricaded it with the kitchen chair, but it won't hold for long. I can see its eyes looking at me as I'm typing. It's breaking through. If anyone I know is reading this, destroy the statue. Please. Oh God, it's getting through. To anyone I've ever wronged in my life, I'm sorry. To anyone reading this, please be aware of the statues you see. You don't know what they truly are. It's through.
So, this happened when I was a kid. Me and a few friends were playing around with a Ouija board when my entitled cousin walks in. He was 9 years old and kind of a brat since his mom, entitled aunt, let him do anything he wants. So when he sees us playing with a Ouija board, he asks to play. We tell him no since he's too young, and we're in the middle of talking with a spirit. But he was welcome to watch. He tells me that he's going to get his mom. This is when the nightmare begins. Entitled aunt stomps in, yells at us for telling her son that he can't play. Then she grabs the board and just snaps it in half. It was a pretty cheap Ouija board, so it didn't take much effort. Then she stomps on the pointer. She leaves in a huff and we just stare at the broken Ouija board. So about a month later, entitled aunt comes to visit and she's not looking too well. She looks pale, has bags under her eyes, and seems to jump at every little sound. I also heard that my cousin is in the hospital since he fell down the stairs. So my mom and entitled aunt were pretty close. My mom's nice, so she puts up with my aunt's bitchiness since my aunt's ex-husband was an abusive asshole. He died while drunk driving, so she got his life insurance money. Okay, back to my aunt. She tells my mom how the past month has been terrible for her. She's been hearing weird noises at night. And also, my cousin claims to have an imaginary friend. The thing is that my cousin's imaginary friend is named Steve, which happens to be the same spirit we were talking to the night my aunt broke the Ouija board. So weird stuff happens, like the vase breaking, or plates breaking, glass breaking, or even the drapes catching on fire. My cousin was in his room when all this happened, and he said Steve did it. Well, My aunt did not believe my cousin, so she grounds him. He did not like this, and all of a sudden, she felt him scratch her arm. Over the next few days, more scratches appeared on her arms, and she showed it to my mom. Also one time, she swore that she saw a shadow man standing in the mirror, walking by the corner of her eye. She was almost at her breaking point. I almost wanted to say something, that she brought this on herself for breaking the Ouija board, but I didn't. I don't know. I feel sorry for her, but she always uses her past abuse as an excuse to act entitled, and she should really consider her actions. So I heard from my mom that my aunt called her a few times, and my mom told me that she thinks that someone is in her house at night. She even once called the police when she believed someone had broken in, but the cops never found anyone. She did this so many times, and each time there were no signs of forced entry. So, it came to a point where her calls were just ignored. My cousin's still in the hospital though. Anyway, my aunt called us to stay with her since she didn't want to be home alone. Of course, my mom is nice. This is her sister after all. So me, my mom and dad come to stay with her over the weekend when we were free. Of course, she demands that we stay for much longer. Now, my school is a bit far from where my aunt lives, and my mom and dad don't work anywhere near our house, so it would take a long time to get where we wanted to be, but she keeps insisting that we stay, since we are family. Okay, so what happens is that while we're staying, nothing weird happens. It was all normal, but then when we were about to leave, she yells at us to stay. Then we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. There were broken plates everywhere. My aunt loses her mind, and we bolt right out of there. So when it's time for my cousin to come back home, CPS actually comes to investigate to see if it's safe for him to stay with an unstable person. Well, she was not helping out her case when she keeps seeing dark figures out of the corner of her eyes and claims that she sees someone in the mirror or the reflection on the window or TV. One time, when she came home from grocery shopping, she thought she saw my cousin in the window. It was noon on a school day, so she yells at him and he vanishes. She later learns that her son never left school. CPS decides to take my cousin away from her and insists that she gets treatment for her mental issues, but she insists that she's not crazy. I'm beginning to wonder more and more if I should have spoke up at this moment. Update. My aunt ended up losing her kid and got locked up in a mental hospital. Even after that, she still acts entitled. She tries to demand better meds and better food when she's being treated for mental illness. She's only been broken, harassed by a poltergeist that followed her home. I'm not really sure if Steve is a mere ghost. He may just be a demon who's behaving like a poltergeist. But if you ask me, I think he's gone too far. My mom and I decided to go visit her at the hospital. She's lost weight, her skin is pale, and she has very big bags under her eyes. As soon as she sees us, she demands to see her child. Now. Right now. My cousin is living with a good foster family. They would probably raise him to act better and not demand anything. He has learned that he can't have everything he wants, and that people can say no to him, something his mother never taught him. He also doesn't have his mother to cry to if someone doesn't give him what he wants. Anyways, we tell her that my cousin is not with us, and I can see that she's mad. But we can see the orderlies, and she knows that she would be subdued if she starts to act up. So, I decided to tell her everything, and she said that she would support me in telling my aunt. As soon as I told her that the haunting was caused by her breaking my Ouija board, she just screams and flips the table. She screams abuse, calling me a witch, a devil worshipper, a bastard, and all sorts of terrible names. She picks up the chair to beat us, and the orderlies rush in. They grab her, pin her arms behind her back, and she struggles, screaming and foaming at the mouth. She blames me for what happened to her. I was going to tell her I could recommend someone to bless the house and drive the evil spirit away. But at that time, my mom and I watch her as she's dragged away. Looks like there's no helping her. I really wanted to help her get rid of the entity that was haunting her, but it looks like she's not willing to listen to me. All she wants to do is throw blame and not even consider a solution. Well, it's her loss. I tried. A month later, I heard that she died at the hospital. She had choked to death in her own room. They found a marble in her throat. I'm not sure if she did it to herself or if Steve decided to finish the job, but she's gone now. We go to her funeral and I can feel a chill, like she's still around and glaring at me, blaming me for her death. I guess I could see if I can contact her on my new Ouija board. Hopefully, I can send her back and maybe help her pass on.
If you have to come in for removal late night, alone, don't answer the phone. Especially line 8. That's one of the bits of advice I got when I started to work at the funeral home. I'm an assistant to the 2 head embalmers, and also a removal tech. Normally work is a hustle and bustle of movement and energy. I never knew why I was told that about the phones until last week. When funeral homes close, some workers are still on call if someone passes, or if there's issues. If you're the removal tech on call, you get the fun job of going to work no matter the time. I've gotten calls at 8 p.m. or 3 a.m. Death doesn't have a time schedule, but when someone calls after we close, they call an answering service directly, so no one has to stay at the funeral home all night. Last week I got a call around 6:30. House removal, no problem. I get to the funeral home in under 20, and I'm getting paperwork started and things like that. All of a sudden the phone rings. It scares me out of my skin. I text my boss asking if lines have been rolled. They have been. I didn't answer the first call. Then about 5 minutes later the phone rings again. Me, slightly annoyed, thinking this is my coworker pulling a prank. I grab the phone and answer it. Hello, this is... Hello? After a few seconds more of silence I ask again who it is, but all the response I get is a beep. And it's not like a timed beep. I counted the seconds just in case. It's like whatever was on the other line was responding to me. I hung up and a few minutes go by, and my coworker pulls up. Hey, did you call the lines a bit ago? I asked him after we loaded up the cot and went on our way. Nope. Assuming you got a ghost call? Yeah, thought it was you. The only way the phones ring after work is internal calls, so I could call prep from the office, but no one can call the home. The lines will never ring on line 1, but never answer line 8. He explained it like he was talking about the weather, like it was so obvious on why. Why don't we answer line 8? Because if you do, all you hear is people screaming. It's quite a freaky thing. On our way to the house removal, we got notified of another passing, at a facility this time. Now we don't have to send 2 people for faculties, so I offered to do the paperwork and he can go on the next removal. The house removal goes well and we're back in no time. He loads up and heads out. I'm finishing the paperwork when the phone rings again. Line 8 this time. My coworker's warning still fresh. I pick up the phone and click line 8. God, I wish I never picked the phone up. It sounded like metal scrapping at first. Then it became clear. It was the sound of screaming. The screaming was so hoarse and loud that it sounded like metal scraping. The pain you could hear. Even holding the phone away made the room chill even more. If someone warns you about a specific phone line, listen. They've heard the scream, and they're trying to protect you. I had previously spent the weekend at my uncle's house, and was in the car with my parents heading home. My dad, through the enormous snowstorm, cautiously navigated the slick, winding roads, with miles of trees on either side. Some country song I barely heard played through the radio at medium volume, as I stared out the window, mesmerized by the heaps of falling snow littering the surface around us. My mother slightly turned her head towards me in the back seat, and tried to make idle conversation, asking me what my uncle and I did during my visit. Before I could start telling her though, a loud sputtering from the car's engine made both me and my mom jump. My father, however, only started incessantly chanting, "No, no, no," turning the car keys back and forth in their slot, as the car gradually came to a complete stop. The car's heater abruptly stopped blowing warm air, the song cut out, and the ceiling lights went dead. My mother, who had been glaring at my father the whole time, sighed heavily. "Ah, that's just great, Derek." "What the hell are you mad at me for? I told you every day for almost 2 weeks now. Take the car to the repair shop." And I kept telling you that I had everything that was needed to fix the car, and that taking it to the repair shop would have been too expensive. They kept arguing until my dad finally got fed up and turned to open the driver's side door, only for it to not budge an inch. He tried the door again, but still, it remained closed. He reached for the lock, only to see it was up. Damn it. My father cursed under his breath, giving the door one more shove before sighing and plopping his hands onto his lap. Judy, try opening your door. My mom grabbed the handle and pushed, but her door remained shut as well. My dad reached back and tried both of the back doors, only to yet again be met with disappointment. The windows didn't fare any better, only rolling down a half-inch before getting stuck. Great, everything's frozen shut, my dad exclaimed, slamming his palms onto the steering wheel in agitation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, flipped it open, and started dialing. Call your brother, my mom groaned as she rested her head on her hand. What the hell do you think I'm doing? My dad snapped back, earning him a glare from my mom before she faced away from him. As my dad talked to my uncle and told him the situation, I turned around and looked out the back window. That's when I caught a glimpse of a figure out in the opening of the forest on the left side of the road. It appeared to be quite tall, though from how far away it stood from the car, its exact size was difficult to deduce. The figure had the physique of a very well-built man, and looked as though he had antlers, like he was wearing the head of a deer or a moose. What else he was wearing, I couldn't tell, because it was extremely dark, and even more snow was falling down by this point. The figure wasn't looking at me or in the direction of the car, but instead ahead of himself. He stood there for a minute more, before turning around and receding into the trees. A few short moments later, another figure sprinted out of the opposite side of the road. He looked like a normal person from what I could tell, no deer head or anything. He was bundled in a large coat, and wore a beanie that covered his ears. I watched as he ran towards where the man with the antlers stood moments ago. He looked behind himself, and slipped on the ice-covered asphalt, but got back on his feet without wasting a single second, and headed into the forest. The storm was too loud for me to hear anything else, but I knew that man was in a panic. Once he was out of sight, I turned back around in my seat and slumped back, thinking about what had just happened. My dad had already ended the call with my uncle by then, and he told us that he would arrive within an hour. So we all just sat there, completely silent. I was getting a bit tired, as it was nearly 10, but the thought of what I had seen moments earlier kept my eyes open. So, for the next few minutes, I stared outside and watched the snowstorm continue, the occasional driver passing us by. It was around 10:30 or so when my dad pointed out a faint glow coming from the forest. My mother and I followed his gaze to the left side of the road, where there was indeed a yellowish-orange glow illuminating the snow-covered trees. As we continued to watch the light get brighter and larger, something else made itself prominent. A noise. Like the glow, the noise started out very faint, but became clearer as it got closer. The sound got louder and louder as it echoed through the air, and then it became all too clear what the sound was. Someone was screaming for help, but just as that had occurred to us, something stepped out from the trees, and to our horror, we saw the source of the light. I'll never forget my mom's ear-shattering scream as a flame-engulfed man tore towards our car and flung himself onto its hood. He rapped at the window, shouting incoherently, before slipping off the car and onto the ground. My dad once again pulled out his phone and called my uncle. Quickly lifting the phone to his ear, he shouted, "Hurry up!" I could hear my uncle shouting back at him, asking what the problem was, but my dad cut him off. "Never mind. Don't come. Don't come," he said before hanging up the phone. My mom was still screaming and wailing, and my dad was panicking, mumbling obscenities under his breath. With what had just happened and both of my parents, the only ones in this situation who could protect me, losing their shit, I started bawling. Until there was the sound of glass breaking, and I looked to see the same deer-headed man as before reaching inside the car grabbing at my dad. My mom screamed louder than ever as another tall silhouette, also wearing the head of a forest animal, broke the passenger side window. Suddenly, she opened the glove compartment, reached inside, and pulled out my dad's ASP pistol. She fired at the figure on her side, and wounded his shoulder. She turned her aim towards the other one, who by now was already fleeing from the car, and barely missed. The flash of the gun made my father flinch and cover his face with his arms. We watched as the second man hobbled back into the forest as well, clutching his shoulder. My mom's head fell into my dad's shoulder, and she began weeping. A few minutes later, my uncle's car stopped right behind us. My dad immediately scrambled outside and towards my uncle, who had also left his car, and approached my shaking father, asking what the hell had happened. I could see him gesturing towards the still flaming cadaver, but my dad just walked over to the passenger side of the car and got in. I heard my door opening and looked over to see my mother unbuckling my seatbelt. She grabbed me and carried me over to the car behind us, where we both sat in the back seat, still crying and shaking like leaves. My uncle continued to pry, asking my dad what was going on. My dad simply told him to go to the police department. I had cried myself to sleep during the ride there, and when I awoke, we were back at my uncle's, where we remained for the next few days until the investigation was finished. When we finally returned home, we started looking for a new place to live, somewhere as far from that area as possible. Life as we knew it turned a complete 180. I wouldn't be able to catch much sleep, and I would hear my mother crying at early hours of the morning, my dad trying to calm her down. I didn't say a word out in public, school, or otherwise. My dad became the sole provider for the family, as my mom would barely ever leave her room. It's been this way for almost 5 years now, and I'm turning 15 in 2 months. Yet no matter how old I get, the memory of what happened that night will never leave. I saw something in my apartment tonight. It's a small place, 2 bedrooms, a small bathroom, and a conjoined living room and kitchen, 3rd floor out of 5. I've lived there for 2 years, and have never experienced something so surreal, so terrifying until tonight. I'd unlocked my front door when I got home. No doubt about that. I live alone, or so I thought, and have very mediocre items in my home as far as monetary value. The TV only costs a few $100, and I can't imagine a burglar wanting anything more than that. But still, I lock my door every time I leave. A good habit ingrained in me since childhood, so I definitely unlocked it after my long shift of delivering pizza to the hungry folks of my town. I spent enough of my day smelling like garlic and parmesan, so generally, I head straight to the shower when I get home. Tonight was no exception. That's where I was given my first taste of things to come. I was enjoying the hot water pouring over my body, lightly singing some pop song, horribly I'm sure, and lathering my body with too much shampoo. I ducked my head into the cascade for a rinse, and when I pulled back, I froze. I listened for a few seconds, in disbelief, and my heart pounded. I heard what I thought was a soft, raspy breathing, but low, like through nostrils. Urgently, I pulled back my shower curtain and poked my dripping head out. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice not nearly as confident as I'd hoped. There was no reply. I stood there for a moment, my hair dripping small droplets onto the faux tile of the floor as my eyes darted around the steamy room. Paranoid? I was sure of it as I slowly pulled my head back into the tub and closed the curtain. I was being silly. I'd gotten water in my ear or something, and it was playing tricks in my hearing. Still, I finished my shower quicker than ever. I was still on mega high alert as I toweled off and headed for my bedroom to dress. Everything was uncomfortable. From the way my room's door stood ajar to the way I felt when I turned my back to my closet. I felt watched. Again, I told myself that I was being dumb, and that I'd made it over 20 years without running into a monster. Why the hell would I tonight? I quickly gathered my pajamas from my dresser drawer and retreated to the living room. Maybe I'll sleep on the couch tonight. Under the safe glow of my TV, I thought, trying to soothe my electric nerves. I began to calm down as I threw on my clothes and flicked on the television. Its comforting glow filled the room, and the high-pitched, nasally voice of Eric Cartman, spewing something about something, brought me out of my own head. I flipped down on the couch and ignored the show, and opted to scroll through my phone. I like solitude. Hell, that's why I chose to live alone. But still, it was a bit depressing doing all of my socializing from behind a screen. Nevertheless, I continued to scroll. Like the zombie that I am, I put it down after a few moments of mind-numbing boredom. But at least it had served its purpose and got my mind off of what I had thought I heard. I turned my attention to the TV. and felt drowsiness begin to rear its head. I was on the verge of drifting off when the episode ended. The screen went black after the credits, preparing to play a commercial, but in that moment of darkness, I felt my heart start to race, and my eyes widened. I saw myself in the mirror-like reflection of the screen, lying on the couch. I saw the dark doorway leading to the bedrooms beside me, and the tall, pale figure standing in the threshold. They say that when something makes you panic, a fight or flight instinct is triggered. Yes, my instinct is flight. As before I knew what was happening, my phone was in my hand and I was rushing toward my front door. I grasped my doorknob, flicking the lock as I did, just as I heard the low breathing approaching me from behind. I hurriedly pulled open the door, and when I turned to jerk it shut, I caught a glimpse of the thing, a gaunt, towering monstrosity. Its hairless, angular body was as white as a corpse. I glanced up and saw that under its bald brow, it had my face. A horrific, lifeless version of me stared back, its face twisted and contorted into a nightmarish mirror of my own horrified expression. That horrible breathing assaulted my ears as I yanked the door closed as fast as I could, but not quickly enough to prevent one of the elongated arms from reaching out to me. A single long, slender finger grazing my cheek before it jerked the limb back as the door separated the being from me. I panted as I watched my doorknob begin to jiggle, and wasted no time turning toward the descending staircase. To my horror, as I bolted past them, every one of my neighbor's door handles started to spastically shake as well. Thankfully, none of them opened, until I reached the first floor. It was the door of the landlady, a sweet old woman I had paid my rent to for years, and it was out of my way. Still, I couldn't help but look and see. She was much shorter than the thing that had been in my apartment, and possibly could have passed for the real thing, had it not been for her bright pink skin, bald head, and elongated arms. She stepped from her door and lumbered towards me, but I was already pushing through the main door of my building. I wished I had the foresight to grab my keys as my bare feet collided with the small pebbles of the parking lot's asphalt. I dared not slow, however. Instead, I ran. I pushed on despite the stabbing pain in my feet, until I reached a nearby 24-hour restaurant. As I neared the neon glow of the popular fast food chain, I realized that my phone was still in my hand. I threw a look over my shoulder and saw that I wasn't being followed. I allowed myself to slow to a walk, trying to calm my nerves as I dialed the police. It rang several times before a voice took over. I stand in the entrance of the long hallway. One flickering, fluorescent bulb lit only a small section that featured a painting of a snowy field with a lone house, which looked eerily similar to one I am in. I started down the hallway, making my way towards the brightened area. Suddenly, it felt very cold. I shivered as I kept walking, rubbing my arms with opposite hands to try to produce some heat. The farther I tread down the hallway, the air felt more and more icy. Every step I took, the rotting hardwood floor underneath me creaked and moaned. I could see my breath in the air. My walk turned swift with anticipation. I finally made it to the dim light in the painting. I studied the snowy field and noticed the scene was an exact replica of the one I was in. The house in the painting was dark and worn down. I was about to look away when a small detail caught my eye. The house's door was open, with snowy footsteps leading into the home. Odd. I looked down the hallway, just to see another light behaving as the first. I started towards it. The cold only got colder, and I felt the sting from the chill. Finally, I made it to the lit area just to find a painting, identical to the one before, only this time, the house was much closer, and I could see through the door. There was a man standing in the living room, facing in a direction where I could not see his face. The man had on blue jeans, white sneakers, and a dark green hoodie. I slowly looked down at my own outfit, realizing that I was the man in the painting. Air escaped my lungs as I panicked from confusion. Everything around me was dark. I was turning in circles, not knowing where to go, until many lights flickered on to expose a seemingly never-ending hallway with paintings all along the right side. Behind me was pitch black, so the only way to run was forward. I sprinted to the next painting and looked it over. My depicted doppelganger was entering the hallway. My heart pounding from the fear, I continued. Feelings slowed down from the ache of the growing wintry air. I ran past the painting, which now seemed to be following me down the hallway. Paintings within the paintings. I came to an abrupt stop when a painting completely changed its focus back onto the house, featuring a tall man in a dark robe entering the house. He had long arms that went past his knees, and a gray pigment to his skin. My heart jolted when I heard the door in the distance slam shut. I heard booming footsteps making their way towards me. I ran, watching the paintings switch focus back to me. I reached the end of the hallway, where a door replaced the artwork. I quickly open it and slam it shut. I take in my surroundings. A small dark room, lit with a flickering light. On the wall in front of me is one last painting. This time, I see myself, screaming in terror as I look over my shoulder, with the gray-skinned man standing behind me. His mouth was seemingly 5 times bigger than a normal man's, with sharp, yellow teeth protruding from every which angle. He had dark, black eyes, and long arms that were so skinny. His bones were pressing against skin. His arms hung high off the ground, reaching to grab me. I slowly look over my shoulder, my face soon mimicking the painting.